Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. Pastor Frankie Leggett III coming to you this afternoon as we continue to shine a spotlight on our brothers and sisters in Kenya. This afternoon, we are going to have a presentation by my friend and my member, Dr. Charles Ochola, member of the First Coatesville Church, which I am also the pastor of. I'm the district pastor for Grace and Coatesville. I'm delighted to have him. He's going to give us some incredible information this afternoon. We are truly going to be educated about our brothers and our sisters in Kenya. But before we do, there is a song. We've got a couple of songs that we're going to play. And so I absolutely enjoyed the music this morning. But we want to share one more song. We'll do another song on the tail end of the program. And so we're going to present one more song to you at this time. And then after that, the next voice you hear will be that of my friend, Dr. Charles Ochola. I ask for him your undivided attention. Sit back, learn, and enjoy.
Yesu kwangu, nenda kwa maovu, nirudishie Yehova nanga hiyo bado ninayo. Neema tunukuwa kwetu, kunyamaza nayo hatia kubwa. Sauti ninayo nitamtangaza Yesu sasa na si kesho. Nataka niwe kama Maria wa Magdala, nipambe Yesu kwa watu, nishuhurie upendo wake mapema. Fursa hiyo bado ninayo. Neema tunukuwa kwetu, kunyamaza nayo hatia kubwa. Sauti ninayo nitamtangaza Yesu sasa na si kesho. Nataka niwe kama Maria wa Magdala, nipambe Yesu kwa watu, nishuhurie upendo wake mapema. Fursa hiyo bado ninayo. Neema tunukuwa kwetu, kunyamaza nayo hatia kubwa. Sauti ninayo nitamtangaza Yesu sasa na si kesho.
Good afternoon, and thank you again for giving me an opportunity to be able to talk to all of you about Kenya, the struggles and all that stuff that's been going on. So before I get started, I'd just like to thank Pastor Leggett and the Grace Tabernacle team. They have done an amazing job. We had an amazing worship hour, and I'm just thrilled. So without further ado, let me get into my presentation here, and I'll share my screen first. Give me a second. And then, okay, I hope everybody can see my screen. So the talk of my presentation today, the title of my presentation is A History of Kenya. I'd like to acknowledge some people. I obviously took some clips from various news organizations, CNN, Citizen News, KTN News. A lot of them were old BBC clips. And then the writers and all those people who were actually instrumental in at least allowing me, whether they know it or not, into taking some of this material. So Kenya, where is Kenya? Kenya is actually a country the size of Texas located on the east coast of Africa. It's bordered to the north by Ethiopia and Sudan, to the west by Uganda, to the south by Tanzania, and to the east by Somalia, and of course the Indian Ocean. What's interesting about Kenya is the equator actually splits this country in half. So I mentioned that for a reason, because there's something I want to talk about regarding that. When I say Kenya, what comes to most people's minds? I think this will help you at least understand where I'm going with this. Second.
And this is going to be a cracker.
The video is a bit grainy, but this is a race.
It will show just how great that world record 144.91 is to Seth Kohler. Billy has gone off, cracking, not going to be headed. Eco Billy running there. Stanley Redwine has to drop out. And Ray Brown it is, has gone on, and Barbados has gone after him. Ray
Kenyan
Brown,
is the second last guy right
having
there.
a very good indoor season. Barbosa goes after him. Look at Erang. He's in fifth place at the moment and absolutely loping along. But this is cracking 24.58 at 200 meters. It's a cracking pace that Ray Brown has set off, because he's going to try and run the sprinting speed out of these fast finishers. And there's 12 meters between him and Erang, the Olympic champion. And it's maybe 15 meters now as Brown sets a cracking pace. Barbosa, though, coasts on his shoulder. Egan Billy does everything absolutely right, and heads Stanley Redline, and then fast too, 50.83. 146.79 is the championship record. Setko's magnificent world record is 144.91. And look at the Olympic champion.
So the Kenyan is almost being overtaken.
Only Bialy is behind him. And still Ray Brown keeps this pace going. Still Barbosa hangs on his shoulder. Egan Billy finding the pace punishing. Redwine overtakes him. 600 meters in 1:17.98, and that is very fast. And Barbosa goes past Brown. And look at Erang come now. He stormed up to Barbosa, and Erang has gone past. Barbosa holds on. There are only 2 men in it. The Olympic champion and the defending champion. And that is a storming run. Look at the clock. 1:44.85. And Sebastian goes for record has gone. And he's not breaking sweat. That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible. He says, look at the way I did it. But
okay, we seem to have a lag here. So what else do you know about Kenya? We talked about this earlier this morning. The 68 languages spoken in Kenya. The climate varies. Wangari Maathai was first African to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Is from Kenya, home of the former first African-American President Barack Obama, Lupita Nyong'o. So Kenya has produced a lot of notable personalities. And Kenya is known for a lot of things. It's not just running. So I just want to give you a different perspective. Now, there's a darker side of Kenya, or a more interesting side of Kenya. Again, this is going to be shown by the following clip.
Becoming independent, Kenya now assumes Republican status within the Commonwealth. Jomo Kenyatta arrived at Jamhuri Park, Nairobi, to take the oath as president. The popular new president was sworn in by Sir John Ainley, the Chief Justice. After that came the induction of the Vice President, Oginga Odinga. These ceremonies were duplicated in the Swahili language, Senior Chief Ole Sangale officiating. Mr. Kenyatta went to the airport with the retiring Governor General, Mr. Malcolm MacDonald, whose diplomatic mission to Kenya ended with the presidential appointment. The wind of change has on other occasions similar to this blown just as harmlessly, largely because of Mr. MacDonald's gift for winning the confidence of the peoples he served. To most Kenyans, Republican Day was liberation all over again. Mrs. Kenyatta was there to bid goodbye to Mrs. MacDonald and the Governor General. There is no parallel in the modern world to British success in giving freedom to the emergent nations.
There's no parallel in the modern world to British success in giving freedom to the emergent nations.
For centuries, the world has looked upon Africa as a thief looks upon treasure. It is there to be plundered. Our forefathers were stolen in millions during the slave trade, and our minerals have fed the industries of the West. Our traditional cultures were suppressed, and their artifacts stolen to fill the museums of Europe and America. Our land was occupied by strangers, and our people confined to reserves. Kenya, now an independent African nation, was once meant to become something quite different. Kenya, in other words, was meant to become a white man's country.
So before we get into that, let's just take a step back. Historians, anthropologists tells us that early human ancestors originated from East Africa. Several human remains have been found alluding to this. And even evidence suggests that around the late Stone Age, people from Ethiopia arrived in Kenya around 2000 BC and again 1000 BC. Around 400 in the Common Era, the Bantu-speaking people arrived in Kenya, in the country, followed by the groups. But I want to give a different spin on this. As someone who believes in creation, I want to suggest, this is just my thoughts, that the Garden of Eden was found in this area. Okay, this is just a fun fact, but bear with me. So DNA analysis has shown that people migrated from outside of this region and this area into all parts of the world, into Europe, into Asia, and all the way down here, and probably even back down into Australia. And this has been shown by DNA evidence. So science does have some backing for this. Why else did I mention that equator? If you remember creation, God created the earth and divided the night and day. He split it in half. You know, it was 12 hours day, 12 hours night. And the only place that occurs is here all the time. The only place that occurs is right on the equator. You know, look this up. Anyway, that's just a little tidbit for me to say, to show that Kenya is where the Garden of Eden was. And if you ever have a chance to visit, you will understand why I'm saying this. So let's get back to the topic. Africa before colonization looked kind of like this. Countries were divided into different kingdoms and, different groups from all over, and it was really a hodgepodge of different tribes and so on. So this is Africa looked before colonization. Today, this is what Africa looks like. If you look at some of these countries, I mean, the lines are so straight, you would think they were actually drawn by a ruler. Believe it or not, they were literally drawn by a ruler, you know? And I'll talk about how this came to be. So let's go into just a timeline of what happened in Kenya. Around the 5th to the 15th century, the Arabs came into Kenya, and the coastal areas they settled, mostly for trade reasons. They were trading in ivory, gold, rhino horns, and unfortunately, enslaved people. So they actually literally were the precursors of the slave traders, and they were doing this on the eastern coast of Kenya. They also, obviously, because of trade, they started mixing their language with the local dialects of Mijikenda people. And this is how the Swahili culture was formed. So the Swahili culture is a very strong Islamic influence. And in fact, any Kenyan who speaks Swahili will be able to understand some Arabic because of this. Then what do you find? In 1498, Vasco da Gama, Portuguese explorer, gets to the shores of Africa, bringing, of course, firearms. And they've also realized, there's something going on here. They want to be a part of this action. So you find that for the next 200 years, they start fighting with the Arabs and to gain control of this region. They wage wars in 1505. They actually form cities in East Africa, and they're trying to gain control of the region. And then around 1585 to 89, the Turks also try to gain control, but are kicked out by the Portuguese. 1593, Mombasa, which is the second largest city in Kenya now, becomes the center of Portuguese power. Fort Jesus is established. A lot of slaves actually sold out of Fort Jesus. And it's got an ideal location, and that's why it was chosen. Then you find that in 1698, the Arab sultans conquer most of the East African coast, forcing the Portuguese to leave the region. So they actually kick them out. So for the next 100 years after driving the Portuguese out, these Arab sultans continue business, spies, slaves, and so on. In 1822, you find that the Sultan of Oman sends an army to East Africa. He fights the local indigenous people along the coast, and of course they fight back, and realizing they can't win, they actually reach out to Britain for help. The British, to their credit, so we think, send 2 warships to kind of help these local tribes, and declare that the Mombasa region as a British protectorate, which lasts about three years. The Sultan of Oman then moves his court to Zanzibar and establishes plantations. And to this day, there's a very strong Arabic influence within that region. Now, what has happened? Remember that the Swahili clans invited the British to help. So the other Europeans realized there's something going on this continent, and there's increased interest. You find that in 1841, David Livingstone, who was actually a missionary, moved to Africa, a missionary, lands in Cape Town. And in 1847, other missionaries began traveling west, exploring the interior of Kenya. There's a whole other story I could get into for that, but I don't want to digress. In 1857, Livingstone actually leaves missionary work because in all these years, he's only managed to convert 1 African to Christianity for a couple of reasons. Livingstone was very accommodating, and actually he didn't look down at people. He tried to work with them, but so he could assimilate, but he was not successful. So he became the full-time explorer. But in his travels, he's seen a lot. So in 1864, he goes back to England and talks about the slave trade and what's going on there. And this actually starts the British or the English thinking about slavery and what's going on. Livingstone dies in 1873, and his body is carried to Zanzibar. So let's get into that scramble for Africa that I was alluding to. The Sultan of Oman offers the British East African Company Concession to administer East Africa. So this is saying that it's actually a company, not the government per se, but it was a company who was controlling trade in this region, okay? Now they completely negotiated with the Sultan, forgot about the indigenous people, and took Zanzibar. So this was just literally a business transaction, you know? Other European colonies, other European colonial powers decide they want a piece of that action. So they get together in Berlin in 1866 and literally decide how they're gonna slice up Africa. The Sultan of Oman, for his work, is given a strip on the coastline, which to this day, again, he's very strong influence. In 1895, the British East African Protectorate is formed, and the capital city of Kenya, Nairobi, wasn't a capital back then, but the city of Nairobi is founded. So this is a map just showing how they carved this. And if you look at some of these, I mean, literally, like I said, straight lines, you know, they just took a ruler to this. Who are these parts we're talking about? These were the British, the French, the German. Remember, these were the superpowers back then. The Italians, the Portuguese, the Belgians, the Spanish. And there were only two independent African states, Ethiopia to the east and Liberia to the west. Now, I say that in quotes because if you recall your history, Liberia, as it is known today, was established as a place where freed slaves from the west could go, or rather were taken to. And then Ethiopia, although it was never colonized, was actually occupied by the Italians. So I'll show you some footage that actually summarizes what I'm trying to say here.
Means unity. Unity is the beginning. And as the African proverb says, if you know the beginning well, the end will not trouble you. Watayari, Gaidi, Watani, Ali, one.
This map is known as the Bullet map. What they were back then.
This was called the Scramble for Africa. By 1914, only two countries remained outside European possession, Liberia in the west and Ethiopia in the east. Britain had seized the lion's share of control. Egypt and the Sudan in the north, the immense wealth of South Africa, the valuable colonies like Rhodesia and Kenya, and richly populated territories such as Nigeria and the Gold Coast. France had invaded Algeria in the 1830s. Now, after new wars of conquest, she added more colonies to her empire south of the Sahara, including the island of Madagascar. Little Portugal carved out two vast colonies, Angola and Mozambique, while Imperial Germany took the Cameroons in southwest Africa and on the east coast, Tanganyika. The vast Congo Basin fell to King Leopold of the Belgians. Italy and Spain completed the enclosure. The fate of the continent was utterly changed.
So now that we have an understanding of how African countries were formed, let's jump back to Kenya. At the beginning of the 20th century, they completed a railroad between Mombasa and Kisumu. White settlers are invited to come to this, quote, fertile land, which it is, while the native people who live there, the indigenous people, are actually forced into native reservations. You heard this happen somewhere before. In 1902, the border between Kenya and Uganda is established. Interestingly, in 1906, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is established in Nyanza. So this is the first place that it penetrates Kenya. To this date, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has a strong presence. When I say you would literally walk every 2 miles and encounter the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'm not exaggerating. That's how popular the Seventh-day Adventist Church is in that region of the world. In 1910, Nairobi becomes the official capital of Kenya. And around this time, World War I in 1914 begins to affect Africa. Now remember, as I said, to the south of Kenya, who was bordering that? That was a colony of Germany. So this region of the world is only the theater outside of Europe where this war is being waged. The World War I is actually being waged in Europe, but for the most part, other continents are not as affected. But Kenyans are fighting their fellow brothers and sisters across the border as proxies for someone else's war. So the following video will just summarize and touch on what I've just talked about.
From the diaries of Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen, King's African Rifles.
Just going back to 1902
8 September 1902. I have performed a most unpleasant duty today. I made a night march to the village where the white settler had been so brutally murdered the day before yesterday. I gave orders that every living thing, except children, should be killed without mercy. Every soul was either shot or bayoneted. We burned all the huts and razed the banana plantations to the ground.
So this is 63 years before independence.
May 1905, Sotik. 92 killed, 2,000 cattle, 3,000 sheep and goats captured, 14,000 rounds rifle ammunition used, and 2 Maxim guns.
A lot of these are actually from diaries of settlers and soldiers in that period.
100 killed, 3,000 cattle captured. January 1906, Nandi, 1,100 killed, 16,000 cattle, 36,000 sheep and goats captured. January 1908, Kisi again, 200 killed, 7,000 sheep, 5,000 goats.
They're literally
It
killing
looks like a
people and
butchery,
taking their property.
Winston Churchill said when he heard of the Kisii massacre. And if the House of Commons gets hold of it, all our plans in the East Africa Protectorate will be under a cloud. Surely it cannot be necessary to go on killing these defenseless people on such an enormous scale. For the people of Kenya, the price of the Pax Britannica was high. The slaughter of thousands, a forced resettlement of whole tribes outside their traditional areas, the destruction of tens of thousands of homesteads and villages, and the confiscation of hundreds of thousands of cattle, sheep, and goats. Of British involvement in Kenya. More than a third of the colony's budget went into military operations. By 1915, every major tribe had faced at least one so-called punitive expedition. This was the foundation on which 70 years of colonial rule were based. The land of the Kamba and the Boran, of the Luo, the Digo, the Luya, and the Taita. The land of the Maasai, the Meru, the Kikuyu, and the Tugen. Of the Kisii, the
They're
Somali,
literally
the
sweeping
Turkana,
from
and
the
the
east
Teso.
coast out to the west coast
The land of the
out to the
Emu and the
western border
Samburu, of the Nandi
and the
and the
north.
Kipsigis, of the Giriama and the Marakwet, the land of all the peoples of Kenya. I have great hopes that the punishment of the Sutik will bring the Kisii to reason, remarked Commissioner Stewart in 1905. It is most important to open up this part of the Protectorate, which is well adapted to European settlement. From a report by Sir Harry Johnston, 1901. Here we have a territory, now that the railway is built, admirably suited for a white man's country. And I can say this with no thought of injustice to any native race. For the country in question is either utterly uninhabited for miles and miles, or at most, its inhabitants are wandering hunters. This will be one source of profit to the United
Not
Kingdom.
true. A lot of this was grazing land for people, and there was actually farming going on. So the land was not uninhabited, as they were stating.
In 1909, Theodore Roosevelt came to Kenya on a hunting safari. I believe this country has a great agricultural and industrial future, Roosevelt told the settlers. And meanwhile, it occupies a unique position as the most attractive playground in the world.
Even the US was complicit.
The frontier is no place for weak and shiftless people, Roosevelt wrote. But the same kind of man who did well when he went to the far west, to the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains 30 years ago, can do well here. The prime need is to build up a large, healthy population of true white settlers, white homemakers who shall take the land as an inheritance for their children's children.
So, what's going on? Land is being taken from indigenous people, lots of land. The indigenous people are being locked up on reservations and actually required to carry identification papers when leaving these reservations. In 1918, World War I ends and even more settlers arrive into Kenya, okay? This obviously just compounds the crisis and land ownership in Kenya becomes a big issue. To this day, land ownership in Kenya is really one of the major issues of concern that affects the political situation. In 1921, the East African Protectorate becomes the crown colony of Kenya. It's administered by a governor. And one of the first organizations formed by Harry Thuku, the East African Association, that's also run by Jomo Kenyatta and others, is formed. Then in 1922, what's going on? You're finding that Africans who have been getting education at these missions start speaking out against what is going on, these British policies and so on. So what do? They ban the East African Association, and Harry Thuku is arrested. Again, using their own words, because they can say it better.
Sooner or later, it must lead to a clash between black and white, Colonel Minus Hagen had written in 1902. I cannot see millions of educated Africans, as there will be in 100 years' time, submitting tamely to white domination. After all, it is an African country, and they will demand domination. Then blood will be spilled, and I have little doubt about the eventual outcome.
Harry Johnson, a colonial administrator, thought that the British were building up Kenya out of nothing.
Here we have a territory admirably suited for a white man's country, but the country in question is utterly uninhabited for miles and miles.
Difference? Very little difference. We had our dogs and our horses and our friends, and we entertained, we went about.
They actually lived
The
better
Africans
in
was very
Kenya
friendly
than they
and
lived
willing to
in
learn.
England.
They worked for them.
Kenya was very attractive to
They
the
never
white
worked
settler
for
back
us
then.
before, but they soon learned. We took it for granted that everything was all right.
To the early settlers, Kenya held the promise of feudal England with a better climate. The country never developed a white working class, and the success of the European dream depended, from the beginning, upon African labor. It is essentially an overseer's country, wrote Lord Cranworth in 1912. Once the oxen are broken and the native taught, continuous manual labor in the sun is no longer necessary. In August 1914, a war began in Europe. Within a few weeks, it was raging in East Africa as well. Kenya was a British colony. Tanganyika, its neighbor to the south, was German. The battles went on for 4 years in the only major theater of war outside Europe. In its conduct, the East Africa Campaign was simply another dimension of the colonial system. It rested primarily on African heads and shoulders. We had been led to believe that we were fighting for the defense of our country against foreign invaders. And yet, after the war, we were given medals and a gratuity of a few shillings and nothing else. This meant absolutely nothing to us. But the Europeans, with whom we'd fought side by side, were given our land here. They held a big lottery, bringing soil from all over the country and placing it in envelopes. Then each would-be settler drew an envelope from a kerosene drum, and if it said Molo or Nanyuki or Nakuru, he would go and settle there, wherever the soil came from.
Those were the fertile regions of Kenya that are being divided up.
My bitterest memory of the war is being given registration certificates while Europeans were given our land. A former army colleague, a European, got the best part of my land, and I was forced to carry a registration card. The pain of that treatment still lingers in my stomach. The bitterness still lasts, and it is the worst kind of bitterness. Then there was our pay, 4 shillings a month. 4 shillings a month for 30 good days, and some maize flour to eat when you spent the day carrying a heavy load on your head. Those were very bitter times. And we were deceived that we were fighting for our land. But where is that land, even today? These are the reasons that we formed our political party. because of these injustices and exploitations. It was a most bitter thing to be moved from your home, like this one here, told to get out of the way while your house was destroyed by a tractor.
First white man I met
This is Harry Thuku,
was
one of
a
the founders of the
missionary
KAA.
who formed a mission here about two miles from my home. And his name was called Mr. W.P. Knapp. He was an American mission. That is my first time I met a European before I went to school. I went to the mission. It was an American mission here, about 2 miles from my home here, where we are. So I went to school there and I acquired the knowledge from that school. My grandfather was called Adirimu, who had a very, very large land here. And my father, his name was called Kaidianja.
The settlers soon found their position challenged by a new generation, baptized as Christians, conversant in the English language, and ready to reclaim the dignity and freedom taken from their fathers by the Maxim gun. In Harry Thuku, the new generation found a spokesman.
My village came in 1915 when we saw many Europeans coming and taking African farms without asking any question or paying any compensation. I was working in government offices afterwards. After 1914 war, I was working in Treasury. So everybody, even settlers here, around here, was known to me very well. They know me very well. We wanted to get our land back first. And if they give us our land back, they would not stay here because they would have nothing to do.
The first political party was for the whole of the African population, and it was called the East African Association. It was led by Harry Thuku. Now, Thuku obtained the address of the colonial office in England and sent a telegram there, setting forth our grievances. When the government here learned of this, they were very agitated. The settlers said they would not compromise, and they demanded that Thuku be arrested.
I was arrested on 14th March 1922. I was taken to police line, Government Road. And after that, the Africans start assembling there, asking for my release.
No Africans in Nairobi were working those 2 days. We had pickets out to make sure people did not break the strike. Mary Muthoni Nyanjiru leapt to her feet, pulled her dress right up over her shoulders, and shouted to the men, "You take my dress and give me your trousers. You men are cowards. What are you waiting for? Our leader is in there. Let's get him." Mary and the others pushed on until the bayonets of the rifles were pricking at their throats. and then the firing started. Mary was one of the first to die. On the other side of the lines, the European settlers sitting drinking on the veranda of the Norfolk Hotel joined in the shooting, and it is said they were responsible for most of the deaths over there. For 30 years after Harry Thuku's arrest, the struggle continued. New parties and new leaders emerged, but their petitions and delegations to Britain, their protests and strikes in Kenya did not produce results. The only alternative was to take up arms, but it was nothing more nor less than a war of national liberation.
So what else is going on in the beginning, at the middle of the 20th century? You find that the Kikuyu Central Association is formed. And in 1939, Second World War breaks out again. 100,000 Kenyans this time are fighting against the Italians. Again, remember, Italy is Sudan and Ethiopia are affiliated with the Italians. So another place where the Kenyans are fighting their brothers and sisters. In 1940, KCA is banned. In 1942, the Kenya African Union is formed to push for independence. And in 1947, Jomo Kenyatta becomes the leader of the Kenya African Union. But Kenyans are fed up. They need to control their own destiny. So in 1952, the Kenya Land Freedom Army is formed. And some of you may know them as the Mau Mau. And basically they start attacking white settlers. Jomo Kenyatta this time is jailed because they think he's the leader of the Mau Mau, and as an organization, they're banned. Interestingly, at this time, the future Queen of England, current Queen of England, future Queen of England then, Elizabeth is in Kenya when her father, King George VI, dies, and she returns to England as queen. In 1953, around 50,000 British soldiers are sent to suppress a rebellion using bombs, and Kimathi is captured in 1956. And pretty much this is what leads to the defeat of the Mau Mau. Again, in their own words. Of Star Wars will know where this song comes from, or this tune. So all over, there's calls for racial justice.
This is Kenya, a rich, prosperous land, but one that has been clouded for many months by a shadow of evil. For this is the land of the Mau Mau. Some are brought in to face justice, others are shot in fights with police and troops, but thousands more escape to continue their crusade of murder and violence.
Certainly, I'll do my best to do so.
So, Eben, will you tell us something about the present situation in Kenya?
Certainly, I'll do my best to do so. I may very well ask, you may well wonder, given the numbers of people engaged on both sides, why it hasn't been stopped long ago. Well, the answer to that is that it may look extraordinary as gone on for so long from Great Britain, but not actually on the ground, it looks quite different. Because we are faced with very great difficulties, great physical difficulties. There are two large mountain messes quite close to the city of Nairobi, one around Mount Kenya, the other mountains called the Aberdares. Each of them is covered with forest, a very dense forest indeed. It's just as dense as what I imagine in the Brazilian jungles are. And the Kikuyu were a forest people long before Europeans ever arrived in East Africa. Kikuyu, as I said, who are in Mau Mau, operate from those forests and have to be sought and have to be chased in them. That's our great difference. Let me go on and say this, that I think that this conspiracy, this violent movement, that takes several forms, and we've got to fight in whatever form it appears in. Sometimes it takes the form of large, comparatively organized gangs operating from these forest bases and attacking either European farms or even more the villages and the houses of ordinary Kikuyu living in what is called Kikuyu land unit. That is to say, the main area, agricultural area for Kikuyu. Sometimes it takes a quite different form. Individual assassins mixing with the ordinary work people, going to work in the morning, coming back from work in the evening in the city of Nairobi. The first, the military problem, the second, the police one. Sometimes it takes a third form, a much smaller gangs, committing robberies, committing attacks, committing arson on houses, either in the European farmlands or in the Kikuyu reserves. And that's a combination of the military and police problem. Those are the three forms, and we've got to try our best to fight all forms, all those three forms.
They lived in the bush, they had long hair, some of them had game skins, coats around them. They ran on, carried a gun in one hand, and they ran like baboons through the bush. Now in the forest, they were lying down watching, and these poor lads would be coming along, walking upright, had no experience of bush warfare, it wasn't their fault. But actually fighting against people like that, they were useless. You had to hunt like you hunt a leopard or a lion, and you had to beat the Mau Mau at their own game.
Remember, he's talking about human beings.
He'd seen me, and he was trying to get himself hidden in some stones. So I put a bullet straight behind his head, and he came over backwards. His adjutant, the most awful fellow I've ever seen. Tall fellow with one eye, long hair, and skin was all over him. Got up and he took a horrible look at me and took off, and I thought I could shoot him. Like this, and I shot and missed him. Then I put the gun up and got him too. And there was another one running a short way over. When I put a bullet, turned out to be a young girl of 16.
At one stage, at the early stages, 1 in every 3 adult males of the entire Kikuyu tribe was in detention.
In order to control the Kikuyu, who provided the overwhelming majority of the Land Freedom Army, the colonial government herded more than 1 million people into some 845 villages. Here they were subjected to 23-hour curfews, forced labor, and constant surveillance.
To the little town of Nairi in Kikuyu territory, Kenya police bring the biggest prize of the anti-terrorist campaign, Dedan Kimathi, self-styled field marshal of the Mau Mau organization. Kimathi was wearing a leopard skin jacket and cap, half disguise, half uniform, when they ambushed and wounded him. His capture followed weeks of planning. The assistant police commissioner explains to pressmen how the net was tightened and the trap finally sprung. Police Corporal Wanjoni on the left was in command of the ambush, and tribal policeman Ndirangu on the right fired the shot which brought the terrorist leader down.
These were the loyal Kenyans who were helping the British.
Loyal price on Dedan Kimathi's head, and it's expected to go to the man who wounded him. Kimathi will be charged with carrying a lethal weapon, a capital offense in Kenya today. His capture will have a great psychological effect, for the Mau Mau leaders still at large are only small fry.
And it's true, the capture of Dedan Kimathi was a very demoralizing point of history, especially for the Mau Mau.
In October 1956, exactly 4 years from the start of the emergency, Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, overall commander of the Land Freedom Army, was captured. To the colonial government, the emergency was a war against criminals, and Kimathi was the arch-criminal.
Turned out by Kikuyu policemen from his own home district. Here are 2 of them, Corporal Wanjori and tribal policeman Ndirangu, who actually fired the shot which wounded Kimathi in the leg. He was trying to escape into the forest, which has known his reign of terror ever since the emergency began 4 years ago.
He was sentenced to death and hanged In February 1957, one of the last of the 1,068 Africans officially executed during the height of the struggle.
Around this time, Ghana is gaining independence.
There was a hanging nearly every day for 4 years.
We thought that we had lost the battle with the capture of Dedemikima because he was the only outstanding person, the spokesman of the forest fighter. Now, with his capture and his death, then that was the death of the revolution.
The battlefield now moved from the forests into the detention camps, from military to psychological warfare. More than 200,000 men and women had been arrested or detained during the emergency. At the end of 1956, some 30 to 40,000 were still in custody.
The Europeans were convinced that Myanmar was not politics, that it was not a political movement. As a result of being convinced of that, they had to find something else, which it was. They believed that the oath which the Kikuyu took turned them into people who were no longer really human, but were animals. And in order to persuade them that they were no longer animals, they would have to be rehabilitated. And the first thing you would have to do in good old devil exorcising fashion was to confess your oath, to spit it out, to spew it out of your system. Then you were clean and new again, and you could be rehabilitated. You could be taught the correct approach to political development in Kenya. Now, one of the worst things about the rehabilitation system was that it was held by the government, but a short, sharp shock was needed for someone to confess his oath. And this short,
rehabilitation is another word for torture.
They hurled themselves into a vast, tangled human mass. And we then physically moved in and manhandled them without what you might call punitive force or intimidatory force, what later came to be known as compelling force. They were taken by the hand, leg, wrist, whatever, and dragged out and front marched with whatever force was necessary, which was considerable. To handle a tough young man physically is very difficult.
And so I vividly remember once when I went to the Ware camps when the government had asked me to take over as rehabilitation officer, meeting the prison officer in charge, Superintendent Cowan, and he said to me, "Come on, let's go and have a look at it. It's all just like a good, clean rugger scrum."
Most Kikuyu still held in detention were forced to work. From a Guthi camp came repeated allegations of brutality.
I would say that that camp was conducted with restrained harshness and severity, that it was extremely orderly and clean, but that probably a degree of physical violence was used to secure the obedience of those
again,
who might
excessive torture.
To the general stability.
You have to read between the lines to hear what is being
Someone
said.
who had taken an oath, who utterly refused to do anything you told him, who disobeyed an order because this was part of a political act on his part to disobey that order, and you were faced with the stone in front of you, and you had to make him do something. So you hit him, you punched him, you screwed him, you did anything you could do to try and make him say, "All right, I confess."
I got a letter which I couldn't ignore, which said, "Death of detainees in a Guthi camp." And then another letter came from them saying, "Please act as we shall all be dead." And therefore one had to, I always sent it to the Secretary of State, of course, for verification. But what was so infuriating was that he always had an administrative inquiry, which meant that the very people who were in charge of the security forces who were committing these atrocities were the ones who sat in judgment on the case. And the whole instinct of the Europeans and those in charge was to cover up, always cover up.
It's like this conscious that there was this hidden bit of the iceberg of violence. I don't know.
Being an astute politician, he couldn't have been totally blind.
Now, I think we all realise there must be a lot more. If there were one or two things going on, there probably was a lot more.
It was intrinsic in the whole attitude of the government of Kenya, as blandly endorsed by the Secretary of State, that an African life wasn't as important as a European life. That was the whole, almost subconscious approach of those in charge.
If a camp was far away from Nairobi, it was more likely that things could get out of control. If it was near Nairobi, perhaps the Red Cross might be taken to it, someone might come and inspect it, you had to be more careful. But basically what we must remember is that people died, many people died, as a result of the violence administered. Testicles were screwed off, people were punched silly, they were given cold water treatment, they were given electric shock treatment. Practically anything that you or I could think of was, in fact, probably in use in Kenya in one or other camp.
Within a year of the beginning of the emergency, while the Land Freedom Army was still on the offensive, the British government had begun to make the political concessions which only a short time before it had refused to consider. A new constitution was introduced in 1954, aimed at multiracial government. African political parties permitted again in 1955. African elections for the first time in 1957.
Can you imagine in Kenya, a place you've lived in for a long time, the day when Africans will govern the country and you will be governed by them? Well, I haven't really given an awful lot of thought. Do you think it's possible? Yes, I think so. Later date. How would you react to that? Well, I think we've all got to realise that one of these days we've got to accept it.
In 1959, when most of the world had forgotten Mau Mau and the detainees, and independence in Kenya was no longer a question of if, but only of when, the incident at Hola Camp occurred.
On
the day of the infamous Hola massacre, detainees who were there and who were regarded as irreconcilable, or the hardest of the hardcore, were divided into three groups. One group was sent to the kitchen. The second group, of which I was a member, was sent to the dispensary for treatment. And the third group was taken to dig on the land, something we had always refused to do. Each of them was given a spade, a basin, and a hoe, and they were broken down into groups of 5 each. They were taken into the bush and ordered to dig, but they refused. And they were whipped and beaten, whipped and whipped, until 11 of them died. It was the greatest of brutalities, for among those who survived, none escaped permanent injury. Then, after causing helpless men to be beaten to death, the colonial government put out the lie that they had died from drinking poisoned water. An investigating team was set up, and the truth came out. Following this incident, the British government was rocked out of its stupor, for it realized that the settler government in Kenya had always been lying.
The outcry shook the House of Commons.
There we had the evidence, and I was able, through those documents, to prove to the House of Commons that these men had, in fact, been clubbed to death by illegal behaviour and the running of the camp.
The government of Harold Macmillan was shaken when one of their own leading backbenchers, a former minister, savaged them.
They had been warned that the policy which was being adopted could have this kind of result. Accordingly, the people who had adopted that policy must be held responsible for it. That was my argument, and that is my belief still. And that would mean that the governor himself would have to accept responsibility unless it could clearly be vested in someone else who had acted without his knowledge or authority.
When the story of Hola Camp was ventilated in Britain in Parliament, it caused a tremendous sense of shock, because this was the first time that the British were made aware of the fact that their own colonial servants could behave in this fashion. and it took a lot of believing. The whole philosophy and theory of rehabilitation in Kenya was based on the fact that Mama was not political. This was proved wrong at Hola. MacLeod, the colonial secretary of Britain, recognized this fact and has himself said that Hola was the real turning point in his own views about Kenya. And the 100,000 people who went through this short, sharp shock, who were in various ways brutally treated, I think it is a very remarkable thing that they bore no grudge in the long run for what was really a very black page in British colonial history.
No senior official was dismissed over Hola. Some months later, Bering himself retired as planned. After Hola, the British released the remaining detainees. They simply went home.
Although the emergency came to an end officially in 1960, the most militant underground leaders were still kept in prison or restriction. Loyalists and moderates, on the other hand, were being recruited into the civil service as the British government pursued a new policy in Kenya, the creation of a stable and cooperative African government on which to confer independence.
Bering hoped that land reform and money for farmers would win over the remainder. While the chiefs accepted medals, the masses still looked to Kenyatta as their leader.
We were telling them that Kenyatta would never, ever return to the Kikuyu country. Never, ever. And we were making this promise to the loyalists. We were making it to the general public. This was, of course, supplemented by the fact that Kenyatta's name, his house was totally removed, his name was removed from everything. He was now to be a non-person.
So as a recap, we see that over 11,000 Mama were killed compared to the 30 Europeans, and 100,000 Africans were detained. Like I said, Dedan Kimathi was executed in 1957, and Kenyatta this time in 1959 was transferred from prison to house arrest, okay? Now they were allowed, the Africans were allowed to form political parties, and that event that we talked about, that last massacre, the Hola massacre, is what kind of opened the eyes of London to see what was going on. All this time, the settlers had been lying to them and telling that all was well in Kenya. That was not the case. So this actually revealed what was going on. And you cannot, well, I don't want to say you'd understand, but the settlers were so fearful of losing their grip on power that they would lie and do anything to hold on to that power. So anyway, in 1960, the state of emergency is lifted. Talks are held at Lancaster House in London to discuss Kenyan independence. Remember, Ghana has had its independence, so this, the ship has sailed, you know, this is coming. So what happens? There's political jockeying going on at this time. You know, Ian MacLeod acknowledges that Kenya is going to be independent. The Kenyan African Union is renamed to the Kenyan African National Union, and it's a party formed by Tom Mboya and Oginga Odinga, who elect Kenyatta as their president in his absentia. Remember, Kenyatta is still under arrest. In June of that year, other politicians, remember I said Kenya has 63 different ethnic groups. So other politicians fearing, at that time, the Kikuyu and the Luo, I believe, were the two largest, well, the Kikuyu are still the largest, the Luos fall down, but they were the two largest tribal groups then. But other tribes fearful that they would dominate formed what was known as the Kenya African Democratic Union, who looked more at federalist view of government, and they elected Ronald Ngala as its president, Masinde Muliro as its vice president, and Daniel Arap Moi, who would actually become the second president of Kenya, was the chairman of the organization. So freedom's in the air, you know. People are tasting freedom, smelling freedom. And in 1960, the first issue of Daily Nation hits the streets, and to this day is the official newspaper of Kenya. February of the next year, KANU wins its first general election under the new constitution, and they take 16 seats compared to KANU's 10 seats. But KANU refuses to form a government because they want Kenyatta released. KANU, however, formed the coalition government with a white-led Kenya party. And then March of that same year, Kenyatta is actually moved because the British have seen that they were not stopping this. So Kenyatta is moved from Lodwar to a halfway house. And then 5 months later, he's released and returns to his Gatundu home. And he becomes a leader of the Kenya African National Union. Now, I did have another video that I was going to show for the sake of time, I'm actually going to skip it and just jump right on to the end. So we find that in 1963, Kenya gains independence with Kenyatta as prime minister. Prince Philip, who I believe died last year or so, accepts an invitation to preside over the lowering of the Union Jack. And on December 1963, Kenya gained its independence, and many Kenyans celebrate. That the next year, the Republic of Kenya is formed with Kenyatta as its president, Oginga Odinga as the vice president, and KANU and KADU combined together, and Kenya becomes a de facto one-party state, which is a whole other story behind that and what the aftermath of that is. But you find that from all this transition, 10,000 whites left the country, but a lot still stayed. And to this day, Kenya has a healthy population of Kenyans who are of Caucasian origin and who were never really bothered with. So Kenyatta was true to his word. So having gone through that story of the independence of Kenya, we know what's going on in the world today. There's a focus on the eastern side of Europe with Ukraine. And with Kenyans knowing the history, Kenya has taken a very firm opposition to what's going on in the Ukraine. And I think I'll pretty much end my presentation with words from the Kenyan ambassador to the UN in the next video.
We meet tonight on the brink of a major conflict in Ukraine. The diplomacy we urged on the 17th of February is failing. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine stands breached. The Charter of the United Nations continues to wilt under the relentless assault of the powerful. In one moment, it is invoked with reverence by the very same countries who then turn their backs on it in pursuit of objectives diametrically opposed to international peace and security. In the last two meetings on the situation in Ukraine and the buildup of forces by the Russian Federation, Kenya urged that diplomacy be given a chance. Our cry was not heeded, and more importantly, the Charter's demand for states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered has been profoundly undermined. Today, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine has been effected. Kenya is gravely concerned by the announcement made by the Russian Federation to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent states. In our considered view, this action and announcement breaches the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We do not deny that there may be serious security concerns in these regions, but they cannot justify today's recognition of these regions as independent states, not when there are multiple diplomatic tracks available and underway that have the ability to offer peaceful solutions. Mr. President, this situation echoes our history. Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. We rejected irredentism and expansionism on any basis, including racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural factors. We reject it again today. Kenya registers its strong concern and opposition to the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. We further strongly condemn the trend in the last few decades of powerful states, including members of this Security Council, breaching international law with little regard. Multilateralism lies on its deathbed tonight. It has been assaulted today as it has been by other powerful states in the recent past. We call on all members to rally behind the Secretary General in asking him to rally us all to the standard that defends multilateralism. We also call on him to bring his good offices to bear to help the concerned parties resolve this situation by peaceful means. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Kenya's respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I hope it was insightful, educational. And again, I want to give my thanks to Pastor Leggett and the Grace Tabernacle Church for allowing us to place a spotlight on the Republic of Kenya and just see that our struggles are universal. I will finish by saying all praise to God. God bless you. Happy Sabbath.
Amen. Amen. Boy, that was what an incredible history. I'm going to reference a quote that Ellen White made about slavery that many people probably don't know. And then I'm going to segue from the enslaved to the enslavers. Because of the heinous things that the enslaved were forced to do against their will, Ellen White says many of them, when they died, because of the forced actions and behaviors that they were forced into, Christ cannot take them to heaven. But he cannot, in good conscience, he cannot send them to hell either. She says they will not come back because Mandingos were forced to just sleep with all kinds of women just so that the enslavers could increase their labor force. And the fact is also true that many of those enslavers, whom many, if not all of them, considered themselves to be good Christians, will have to pay for what they did to our people. All over the world. All over the world. They will have to pay for what they did, and justifying their actions through scripture, no less. It is, Doc, it is hard to watch. Even as a Christian, man, it is hard. It is, oh my God, it is hard to watch.
It is.
It is difficult to watch that information and then listen to the smugness of the attitudes of the people who thought they were justified. And we beat them and we did this and I shot and I thought he was a tall man. Turned out he was only 16.
Right. It's terrible.
God said, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And I want it to be meted out because I want them to feel what my people. I'm not gonna be the one doing it, but I'm going to approve of it when it happens. I want them to feel what my people have felt all over the world. Because the man referred, he was talking about, and I'm forgetting the word, you had to re something them. What did he say?
Something re-educator. I forget the word, but it was I know what you're talking about. He wanted to re-indoctrinate them, or
yeah,
along those lines. Yep.
And then he referred to them as monkeys.
Oh yeah.
We're talking about human beings.
You see how that parallels what's going on in the country today. In our country here in the US.
Yes.
Black Lives Matter movement has shown a spotlight, and I look at what's been going on, and when I was working on this, it's like history was repeating itself.
Sure.
This disregard, and you said it earlier, the disregard for the person of color, specifically the Black person of color.
Right.
It's been there for a long, long time. But in my heart, when I think of the persecution of God's people, we have to have a special place in God's heart.
Absolutely.
Because of what we've been through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No ifs, no ands, no buts. The gentleman at the UN that his address was absolutely profound. And the point that I came away with was our maps were not drawn by us when we secured our independence. We inherited those maps and those forced boundaries, if you will.
Yes.
Separated many of our people in another country.
Literally families. Families were split into two different countries. Most of the problems you see in Africa right now are based on that. In fact, what you're seeing, and that's why he brought that that Russian-Ukrainian issue right now, is because the Russians are seeing those two runaway provinces, or in their minds, runaway provinces, Russian speaking. So they're equating them to that, during the breakup of the Soviet Union. That's exactly what happened. And we're trying to tell them from history, this is not the way to go.
Right.
Because it'll cause wars. A lot of the problems you're seeing in Somalia right now.
Yeah.
A portion of Kenya that is Somalis, and the other part are Somali and Somalis. So families were literally split in two. Tanzania, there's groups that are literally the Maasai on the Kenyan side, on the Tanzanian side. In Uganda, you have the Luos on the Ugandan side, on the Kenyan side. So you have all these divisions of families, and I'm sure that's just Kenya I'm talking about, because that's what I know.
Sure.
But throughout the whole continent.
Right.
You know? So
and he said, if we were to attempt to resolve our border issues, there would be wars all over the continent.
Yes.
It is not, we've chosen not to go in that direction.
Exactly.
Oh man, that was brilliant. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
I want to open it up. Now is the time for us to entertain some questions, Doc.
Sure.
And we have a question here. You mentioned it, Doc. You mentioned it. When you referenced, you said there's still quite a Jomo Kenyatta made a promise that he was not going to evict, he was not going to harm the whites who remained in Kenya, and he kept his promise. And you referenced a large number of Caucasians still living. Do you have any idea of what their population might be?
Oh, I don't know. It's in the lower percentages, but it's in the lower percentage number wise, but in land ownership, it's still huge. They still own, oh yes, they still own a lot of the land. If you recall, in, gosh, what was that? 2017, there was I don't want to call it civil war, but there was issues that broke out in Kenya. It was land related issues that brought that about, because you have a lot of these people whose lands were taken away who want this land back. Sure. And now you have friction between different tribes, you know. I wish Pastor Kimani was on, because he'd probably be able to talk to this even more. But yeah, no, the white settlers are still there. Kenya, you heard, who was it? Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president, went out there.
Right, right.
He recognized that this is a white man's playground, and he, I mean, if you've never visited Kenya, you need to make it on your bucket list. You need to put it on your bucket list.
Okay.
The flora, the fauna, the climate, everything about Kenya will make you realize why, when many people, especially from Europe, visit that country, they don't want to go back to their countries.
Wow.
You know, and then Kenyans, I don't want to, well, I'm a Christian, are very welcoming. Okay.
Okay.
So, you know, there's this sense of, I mean, Kenya is the one place, one of the few countries that you will go and be welcomed, genuinely welcomed.
Okay.
You know, and the Europeans have taken that to heart. But Kenya was destined to be a white man's land. There's no doubt about it. That was the plan for Kenya.
That was the plan.
That was the plan for Kenya. Thank God it didn't turn out that way, but that was the plan. And it's still, for a big part, influenced by the British. The reason that 2017 fracas didn't go too far is because the British and the Americans stepped in and said, stop this, it has to stop. And that's what stopped that. So I went roundabout answering your questions, but it's, I don't know if it's 4 or 5%, but there's enough. Okay. And when I say Kenyans, these are Kenyans who don't know any other country, the white population. They've literally, these are the descendants. They've
lived there for decades.
Right. That's their home. Yeah.
I had a question when we first got started, and wait a minute. Let me see if I wrote it down. Let's see if I wrote it down. You stated, and we saw the line for the equator.
Yes.
Drawn right through the country. What is the impact? What is the climate impact of that equator that really cuts the country almost in half?
Well, the equator, again, that's just a geographical thing, but what it does, it gives Kenya a very moderate climate. And like I said, Kenya is the equator is the only point on Earth where all year long, you're going to have 12 hours day, 12 hours night. Equal. That's it, yeah. Because if you look at the world's rotation and revolution around the sun, that's the only place where 12 noon, the sun is directly overhead. You know, so you could literally set your clock to the time. Wow. You know, you could literally state that. So again, this was just me thinking. I was like, Eden has got to be in this place. Where else could God have said all these things to happen and the way they did? And then when you combine that with the scientific evidence from the DNA analysis, right? We believe in creation, but they say man came out of Kenya. I'm sure you've all heard of these things. It makes you think. Sure. It just makes you think. This must be the birthplace of man, or the creation of man. You know. Right. Yeah. Wow. I don't have any other questions in my chat box for you, Doc. This was so thorough that I'm going to assume that you answered all of our questions. This was truly a thorough look at Kenya. I've got to go, and I agree with you. We all need to go, because what has happened, at least when, it's amazing that all of, as it relates to our people, the colonists created a concept of divide and conquer. And they've mastered the concept. Divide them and you can defeat them. And, coming up as a kid, we heard stories that, Africans were just the most backward people, still living in jungles and huts and all kinds of things. And that's just to continue to keep us separated and apart. That's right. Because if we ever unified our forces and unified ourselves, we are an unbeatable force. I mean, you've been to a general conference session? Yes. Which one have you been to? Which ones? How many have you been to? One. It was one. Where? Which one? Where? Was that in Maryland? No, that was in general conference. Sorry, I'm thinking of camp meeting, not general conference. Camp meeting. Okay. Camp meeting, not general conference. Camp meeting. Okay. If you go to a general conference session, my wife and I went to my first one, 2000 in Toronto. Okay. And we're in the big stadium where the Toronto Raptors basketball team plays. And we get there and we just arrive and we are kind of standing in the foyer area, but we're overlooking the stadium and we can see all the people. And she and I were talking about the world church. She and I looked at each other because we saw Black and brown people from all over the globe who were Seventh-day Adventists. And we turned to each other and we said to ourselves, where are the white people in this church? Yeah. Overwhelmingly Black and brown all over this church. Yeah. It's not even close in terms of the reputation, in terms of the population. Yeah. And the representation, that's what I was looking for. Yes. The representation of Black and brown people versus non-Black and brown people. It's not even close. No. And, and I understand their concept. If all of these Black and brown people all over the globe ever unified and united, all of their tremendous resources,
nobody else stands a chance. This world is black and brown wherever you go.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I understand, you know, their concept of divide and conquer. I mean, you look at Rwanda with the Hutus and the Tutsis. One group massacred the other, and they're all black.
Oh yeah.
It's incredible the impact that culture has had on our people.
Yes.
But a day of reckoning is coming. Yeah, a day of reckoning is coming, and God, I said it before, I say it again. He is going to avenge our folk, and people are going to have to pay for the things that were done to our people all over the globe. So I want to thank you for the awesome job you did. And I absolutely appreciate you coming, you and everybody. Again, I know I did it this morning, but I want to do it again. I want to thank all the participants, all those who were on camera, on screen this morning, for all of their contributions. I want to thank our communications and media team for all of the hard work that they've done. I want to thank P. Gordon and the Black History Committee for the time, and everybody on that committee. They do an outstanding job.
Yes.
I think I was supposed to announce a winner from last week, and I'm not, but I haven't heard. So I need someone, just before I conclude, to share with me who the winner from last week was, so I can make that announcement. I'll pause. And we are going to have a song before we conclude. So maybe we can go to the song now before I have prayer. And in that interim, someone can share with me who the winner from last week was. We have our last quiz on tomorrow. So Doc, what we do is our committee. Oh, okay. The winner was Sister Jackie Anderson. So we take the information that is shared from the 11 o'clock service and the 4 o'clock program, and we put together a question that we upload at 1 o'clock every Sunday during this period. And the winner gets a gift, and the individual who won the most prizes during this time, they will get a prize. So Jackie Anderson was our winner from last week. We've got one more quiz that will be uploaded on tomorrow, so be checking those out. I want to thank everybody for their involvement in that quiz. We're now going to have our last musical selection, and then after that, I will have a word of prayer, and we will conclude.
Amen.
Amen.
Umepitia mengi maishani, hata wafikiria kukata tamaa. Magumu hayo unayoyapitia, wanajua yeye yuko nawe. Umepitia mengi maishani, hata wafikiria Hakuna kitu cha dunia kitakachodumu milele. Ni Yesu atadumu milele. Tumaini letu liko kwake.
Do the closing prayer as we conclude this service. As the sun is setting in the west, and I just want to put the finishing touches on an awesome, awesome day with a word of prayer. Please bow your heads with me. Father God, I thank you for my friends. We've just watched their incredible struggle for freedom, equality, liberation. I thank you for their incredible intestinal fortitude and their unwillingness to submit to an external force and rule by others. I thank you for that. I pray, dear Lord, that you would continue to bless Kenya. mentally, physically, financially, every way possible. Bless our churches there. Bless our members there. Bless the work there. And Lord, it is my prayer that when you come, we will all meet in the kingdom above and meet one another and forever be united in peace and never, ever, ever again be considered monkeys and second and third class citizens, but will be considered by God himself sons and daughters of God. We look forward to that day. Thank you for hearing and answering our prayer. In Jesus' name I ask it. For his sake I pray. Amen. Amen. Dr. Ochola, thank you much. Give my love to your wife, my friend. And I absolutely appreciate you. All right.
Thank you so much. God bless. And thank you all. Special Grace Tabernacle Church.
Thank you much, my friend.
Bye-bye.
And to Grace, I want all Grace to now transition to, I have 5:48. Sabbath closes in 2 minutes, is over in 2 minutes. Please transition to our fellowship Zoom link because we're going to go right into our business meeting in 2 minutes. All right. So I will see all of you on the other side.